So, you know what a narrative is at this point, but making a good narrative, writing a good story, is a little bit different. This lesson covers some things that you can look at and manipulate in order to write a good story. Your keywords are the basics, including plot, sequencing, suspense, and dilemma. You also have setting, character, and characterization, craft, voice, showing, not telling, this one is very important, inference, and word choice with figurative language, symbolism, allusion, onomatopoeia, irony, dialect, and sensory words. Think about it. What makes a good story? List some ideas in your notes. You might have said characters that you can fall in love with or really relate to, storylines that keep you guessing, descriptive passages that are interesting, or events that you can relate to. These elements are all things that writers think about when they're creating their work. How do I make my story interesting to my reader? We start with the basics. You have 3 basic components that all stories have to have: plot, setting, and characters. How an author approaches the development of these 3 components makes all the difference to their story. Plot is, again, all the events from the start of the story to the end of the story. Most of us will write a story in chronological order. This happened first, this happened second, this happened third, so on and so forth. But if we tweak the rules just a little bit from what we're used to thinking, we can create lots of different interesting effects that make our readers want to read along. This is called sequencing. The order of the events in the story are the order of the events. Tripping over my tongue. The order the events of the story are told in is sequencing. When we change the way we sequence our events, we can create suspense and build interest. Chronological, like I said, is going from beginning to end. That's kind of boring. We do that all the time. But we can change up that and go backwards a little bit with a flashback where you start at the future and you move backwards and tell a little bit of information the reader didn't know before coming back to this future point. You can foreshadow, which is actually looking ahead a little bit into the future. You hint at things that are going to come. You don't tell them outright because you don't want to give away the surprise, but you give the readers clues to make predictions on so they can think what's going to happen next. You can leave parts open. You don't have to tell everything. For example, with your resolution, maybe you're not going to straight up say whether or not they had a happy ending. You'll make the reader wonder. This also helps to build suspense, which is that feeling of anxious curiosity that makes you wonder what's going to happen. And also, to add suspense, you can throw in a dilemma. This is a problem that doesn't have a clear right or wrong answer. They are both equal options, but one will have this result and the other will have this result, and you may not know which one's going to cause the result that you want. Or maybe both results are equally good or equally bad, and you make the reader wonder what the character is going to choose. With setting, we get to choose whether or not it's going to be a real place or a made-up place. Is that made-up place going to be familiar, or is it going to be completely exotic, really different? Is the setting going to be outside the character or inside the character? Are you going to straight up tell them about the world, or are you going to make them pick up on the world's different traits by writing the details down and letting them piece together the clues? These are all things that we can do with setting that help readers get into a story. Most of the time, having something to relate to gives the reader more interest in the story. So even when we do made-up settings that are a little different, we want to make sure we include elements that the reader can go, oh hey, that looks like my world. Okay, characters. These guys are your selling points because they are the people that make your story come alive. The more realistic and well-developed a character is, the more the reader can relate to that character, the more likely the character is to draw that reader into your story. This is called characterization, the clues an author gives to describe the character. Most young writers will do direct characterization, where you straight up tell the audience who your character is and what they're like. You say something like, Sally Sue is an 8th grade girl with brown curly hair and green eyes who really likes to play volleyball. Or maybe it's Johnny Jim, who's the football player, or, Bob, who is the outcast, something like that. But you tell me outright exactly who he or she is. That's a little bit boring. We could also go for indirect characterization, where the audience has to kind of figure out who our character is based on the things the character says and does and thinks through the descriptions that other characters and or the narrator provides. This is the one that we prefer to use when we're writing because it creates more suspense and makes the reader think more. The more the reader has to think, the more interest the reader generates. Authors also use craft. This steps away from the basic element a little bit and talks more about how you write than what you are writing about. This is the way the author uses plot and sequencing and characterization and voice and word choice to create your story, your personality on the page. Okay? Definitely with the personality on voice. What sort of traits do you give your characters and your worlds and so on and so forth? You really want to try and show your reader, not tell your reader, which goes back to indirect characterization and other inferences where you're making your reader use the details to figure out what they're looking at, not telling them what they expect. We want a guess or a prediction made on those details. Word choice is also important. The way that you thread together words, strong, vibrant, describing words, dialect, so on and so forth, makes your story interesting. We have 2 categories. We do have your standard descriptions, okay? Most basic word here, where you want to use strong, vibrant, specific language, is going to be the part and descriptions. You also have figurative language, which are words that are crafted to have a meaning that's not literal. For example, he weighed as much as a hippopotamus. That's not literal. You're not going to put him on a scale and a hippopotamus on a scale and find out that they weigh the exact same. You're just saying that that person is really, really heavy. There are lots of different kinds of figurative language, and many are used in writing. This is just a sampling. You have symbolism, where you can represent one thing with another. For example, maybe hope has been represented with the sun rising all the way through the story. So yellow or the sun then become a symbol for the feeling of hope. Allusion is referencing another story or historical event to draw a comparison between the two. If your really nerdy character thinks Avada Kedavra at the bully who's picking on him, that's an allusion to the Harry Potter series. Onomatopoeia is using words that sound like their name, throwing a bang into the middle of the story instead of telling us he dropped his books with a loud thump can really kind of liven things up. Irony is having a contrast between what you expect and what really happens, or between reality and what appears to be reality. This one's a little tricky, but it can be very awesome if you pull it off. Dialect is the way characters speak, how they pronounce their words, the slang they use, whether or not they use proper grammar or improper grammar. These are all important things to consider. And sensory words are some of the most basic, most important ones we have. These are the ones that create imagery, a mental picture. So sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. You can also throw in feelings. These things help build a world for your reader to relate to. These are all things you should consider and experiment with as you are writing to build interest and create an interesting narrative.